is very important. So in conclusion, we are very, very bullish about the tech market in China. The overall market is hard to tell, but we're very bullish about the tech market in China. We believe the rapid changes in the Chinese economy and the opportunities that arise will help us create a lot of value for our entrepreneurs and our investors. But while our model continues to evolve, we believe our strength will continue to be our pro-entrepreneur spirit and our desire to be the best in the early stage investor in China. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lee, for a very inspirational talk. I'm conscious of the time, so we'll save time for questions. Does anybody have any questions?
I'm happy to take questions not related to this talk. So I know there are people who, not everyone wants to be an entrepreneur. So.
We have microphones going around. Okay. You've got one already.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Lee, for your insightful presentation. So my question is probably a little bit off the topic, but I will assume that a fair amount of students sitting here are actually more interested in understanding the Chinese tech entrepreneurship, not from an entrepreneur's perspective, but from, for example, an angel's perspective or from a venture capitalist perspective. So actually, I came from Beijing, and I studied in Hong Kong for business, and I just went to Carnegie Mellon University for exchange last year, where I studied computer science and become really fascinated in it. So given this kind of integration of business and computer science, and assuming that there are a lot of fellows sitting here also interested in integrating their own discipline with this high-tech Internet Plus trend, what do you think we can position ourselves for future career opportunity in venture capital or things?
Or entrepreneurship.
Yeah,
okay, sure. Actually, your question is very relevant to the topic. Thank you. Well, I think another way to look at the question is when we invest in an entrepreneur, what do we look for, right? We obviously look for all the normal things, being smart and hardworking and so on. So we'll skip that. But we also look for a few I think there are a few questions you could ask yourself about whether you should be an entrepreneur, whether you're a good fit. One question is, why you, right? I think when you want to be an entrepreneur, you need to answer the question, yeah, this business idea you have is great, but why you? What is special about you? Are you more passionate, more knowledgeable about the space? Or do you have a great team? I think that question, I think you need to always ask. Don't think of just, I'm going to jump into this area because this looks like a cool space, everyone's doing it. You know, why you and why are you special? Another thing is, I think all of you in the audience are very smart. But one of the big characteristics of smart people is smart people are often not very focused. And they have a lot of ideas, right? So it's very dangerous if you start a company, have a team of 5 people, and you have a new idea every week. Because, because your team won't know what the priorities should be, and they'll listen to whatever new idea you have, and they'll go off in a new direction. You'll try lots of things and not do any of them well. So I think if you're in research, or it's okay, because that's what you're paid to do, to have lots of ideas. If you're working in a large corporate, that's probably okay, because the corporation has lots of resources, and maybe you get promotion for having all the great ideas and managing larger and larger teams. But entrepreneurship doesn't work that way. So a very good test is, are you the kind of person who can roll up your sleeves, get your hands dirty, work on one problem, focus on it, solve it, and not think about anything else for a while? That's another good test. I think in addition to that, another big angle of successful entrepreneurs is really, I think there are more and more people who want to be entrepreneurs. And if you're not I think it's important to make sure you have all the experience before you jump in. I think you can point at the last 5 years and say, oh, such and such was just had no experience and they did so great. But the space is getting more crowded. So I think you need to make sure that you get all the experience you need. And sometimes that means out of school, the best thing to do is not to go start a company immediately, but to work for someone and learn from that. You could go work for a larger company, but I think probably it's better if you want to ever do a startup, go work for a smaller company. Because in larger companies, they have a tendency to put you in the very small silo and turn you into just a tiny little screw in a giant machinery. And you don't really get to know how the whole machine works. If you work in a 10-person company, you get to try everything, and then you'll have a stronger chance of really understanding what a startup is about. The last suggestion is if you want to do a startup and you want to go pitch at the VC, you got to know so much about your space, and that the VC is learning from you. So this is one of the metrics we have, is when we talk to an entrepreneur, while we may have more industry experience and knowledge, but within the specific place that the entrepreneur is starting a company, he or she must know so much more than we do. We must walk away thinking that we learned from that person. And if that isn't the case, you haven't done enough homework. So it's really important to drill down, get your hands dirty, understand the market, the competition, so well that you are truly the expert. And some of the advice may apply to other areas, but to an entrepreneur, that's what we look for. Thanks.
The question is this. I know that you pay a lot of attention not only to the investments and entrepreneurship, but overall societal development in China. As low-hanging fruits are so bountiful and so many opportunities exist for people to take a relatively straightforward business plan and be able to multiply the number of stores, number of franchisees into the hundreds in a matter of a year, and then quickly the company will be valued in the millions and billions. Do you worry that it tends to encourage the younger generation to be less patient, to be less willing to invest in the long-term development of some of the fundamental technologies that would take only years, if not decades, to mature? And certainly the Silicon Valley VC investment targets are a little bit different, because in a mature market, you don't have such wonderful opportunities with a lot of low-hanging fruits. So I wonder if you have an angle on that particular issue.
Thank you, David. Definitely that is a worry, I think, because, but that's in some sense not a bad problem to have, because there's so many low-hanging fruits, no one's climbing very high or inventing the ladder, right? I think that's clearly the case today. I think one answer is that the low-hanging fruits will get all pulled at one point, and smart people will learn and grow. I think that's probably the natural thing that will happen. That's probably happened in other economies. As I grew up in Taiwan, I experienced that when I was younger. And now I think there are not so many low-hanging fruits anymore. And then I think people have to reach harder and think harder. I think that's part of it. The other thing is that I think there are also some unique advantages to China for technology development. And this is the part I would worry, for example, about Hong Kong, is that because Chinese market is so large, and in an area like computer science, if you're not dealing with big data, you're just playing games. You're just playing with toys. So increasingly, a computer scientist will not be so qualified anymore if they haven't really touched, data that couldn't be stored unless they had 1,000 servers. And I think in smaller markets, companies don't have that kind of data. Universities don't have that kind of data. So I would sort of worry about the role of universities and a little bit about the role of smaller countries or regions that don't have access to that kind of data. You can see that deep computer scientists are coming out of Baidu, Alibaba, and Tencent, not because they got better training than you did here. You guys probably got better training, but they got to play with bigger data, and that helped them advance their thinking. So in terms of our investments, we actually made quite a few investments in senior people coming out of really large technology companies. Because they've played with really, really big data, they have new ideas. So for example, we invested in 2 companies that came out of Baidu. One is a world programming champion who did large data on one of their main core technologies. Another is from their research lab, and they're both building amazing high-tech companies. So I think there are interesting, deeper technologies coming out because China now has a larger number of companies that have huge amounts of data that forces their computer scientists to be excellent.
If you look at this, you made using an example like Uber or Didi Dache. Look at those sort of the companies. If you look at the innovation or the technology, my understanding is probably the key technology is the map technology, where you can find the route, you can find those things. You see Uber, probably Google has interest in it. And I do not know whether, in China, Baidu has interest in Didi Dache. The question is why the company like, Baidu wasn't move fast enough getting into this area. That's the question. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. I think the first part of my answer relates to how important map actually is. Map is obviously an incredibly important element of location. However, we're not finding people going into ride sharing from map as an application. It sort of needs to be built separately. That's people's belief of an entry point. People don't think map as a way to get into ride sharing. So ride sharing is a separate app. The other small thing is that companies like Uber actually have really great back-end technologies that help them compute the shortest routes and the right algorithms and the peak. Most of the money in Uber is made when you have the spike rates, which we as users hate, but that's when they make the most money. They need to figure out when to charge you more, and that's where their premium arrives. So there's a lot of data scientists and big data behind the Uber and the likes of Uber. So why hasn't Google or Baidu come up with that idea? I think some of it has to do with the innovator's dilemma. I think when you become so successful in a particular product, such as Amazon with e-commerce, or Google and Baidu with search, or Uber with ride sharing, that tree becomes so large that you don't get to plant other trees, and also other small trees may start to cannibalize your business. So a Google or a Baidu may view the whole world in terms of maps. In fact, I think in the early days of Uber and Didi, if you talk to Google or Baidu, they would probably tell you they think ride sharing is a part of the map app. And ultimately, they learned it wasn't. So I think there's some kind of arrogance from success and a maybe difficulty to visualize something without the baggage that you have. But what's even the worst example is when the new invention requires you to cannibalize an existing business. So probably the best example is Kodak, right? They were actually the inventors of the digital camera, but they said, let's not ship that because it'll hurt our film business. So large companies have a really hard time producing new products that cannibalize their existing cash cow. And that's why I think as powerful as Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent are in China, as powerful as Google and Facebook are in the US, ultimately their huge successes will become barriers to their being the most innovative. So when people ask about, are you worried about such and such company having monopoly? Actually, in general, no, because I believe the monopoly that they have will become, generally speaking, become a baggage that new technology waves will force them to be challenged and often lose to the challengers.
Okay,
Thank you, Dr. Lee. My name is Carl Lee, and I'm studying in Business CityU. I'm really enjoying your speech, but I want to ask a question from what you haven't mentioned about, which is a new word called P2P. Since you have mentioned that the large population and the large amount of the middle class in the China cities, and there must be some demands or needs for like how to deal with their money, then the word is quite popular these days, like the P2P, or to interpret in that Chinese way, like online finance. But it seems that you are not interested in that. So what do you think about this newborn industry, and what's your reason for you not choose to involve in that industry? Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you. That's a very good question. You see we have some good success records in many of the areas, but not in the P2P area. The short answer is we missed it. And not that we didn't think of it, we chose not to go into it. At the time when P2P finance were coming up, we discussed it internally extensively. We knew that it was a great opportunity. In fact, in many cases, the American market is a very good predictor for what might become hot in China, right? So you know those credit card loans and home loans are becoming hot in the U.S. Lending home. It's very clear that would be an interesting area. But we thought that banks in China would have enough power to cause the regulators to shut down such businesses, and that the risks were too heavy for us to take. But we were wrong. And our lesson from that is reflected in the slides today. That really says traditional people don't get it. So we overestimated the bank's knowledge about how big an opportunity this is. And we also forgot, as successful as P2P is, and there are multiple billion-dollar companies created, they're still a drop in the bucket from the point of view of a bank. So they're not big enough to matter. So I think we've become humbled and kind of stepped back and said, let's not assume, all the traditional companies will get it or will care or we're big enough, and let's not assume they'll all go cry to the government and something will happen. The success of Alibaba is a great example, right? The banks are probably kicking themselves now. Alibaba is certainly getting big enough, but they weren't savvy enough to know early on to complain. Now Alibaba is everywhere. There's no way anyone can stop them anymore. So that's the answer. That's one part of the answer. But the other part of the answer is we also think P2P is not the end-all be-all. If you think about the overall finance, the P2P part is only a small part of overall finance. The entire insurance, banking, securities industry, there's huge amounts of inefficiencies in them. And when you have big data, it's so easy to save money and make money. And the question is figure out what are the next areas to get into. For us to go back and invest in P2P finance and arbitrage, it's not very sensible because our belief, if you've read, you're an entrepreneur, I'm sure you've read Peter Thiel's book, From Zero to One. It's a very good book and important to read. And the most important concept in the book is when you have internet and competition, it naturally forms monopolies. So you want to always bet on the company that has a high likelihood of becoming a monopoly, because having that 80% monopoly share is hugely beneficial to monetization. So 80% share company is not 4 times as powerful as a 20% share company. It's probably 400 times more powerful. So for us to go now bet on something we missed would mean that we'd have to go pick the ones that are likely to become the monopoly. And the ones that are likely to be monopoly are worth $1 billion, and we don't have enough money to invest in them. So it's a very practical question of let's go look for newer field that might be smaller, more interesting, and that's really our strength. So we are now looking at B2B companies that can provide big data, machine learning to help the areas of personal finance, money management, securities area, and insurance and banking. So I think finance is much, much bigger than P2P. So when you missed it, you got to acknowledge it and move on and find a new, fresh field.
You mentioned about the importance of gauging policy changes with the government. And I want to ask you a very specific question about One Belt, One Road, 一带一路. How can we, in the internet and e-commerce business, monetize from this initiative of the government? Thank you.
Okay. Well, I think that's, I think traditionally when people think about cross-border commerce, they think about with developed countries. I think this points to a new road and new opportunities. I think in some sense, I believe another interesting part of China is that China's growth is kind of a role model for a lot of developing countries. So Chinese companies who have witnessed and participated in China's growth can be perhaps a better supplier of products and services to other developing countries that may follow China's path. So when one thinks about whether, when one often assumes U.S. will dominate everywhere, it's pretty clear that American products and services, whether it's physical products or services or internet technologies or even hardware, often dominate in English-speaking countries first, and then Europe, Western Europe, and then often Japan. But I think in countries outside that, maybe the development of the demographics and the young people are more like the Chinese people in China. So I think potentially One Belt, One Road can point the way to how Chinese merchants can look at what are the areas in where their participation in China's growth might point the way for the future.
Okay, now who will ask the last question? Okay, all right, okay then.
Thank you, Kai-Fu 老师. Just mentioned by that girl, I know that you were sick very seriously in 23, and my question is a little different. How are you now? And are there any new ideas about life developed by you? Yes.
Well, that's a very suitable for a closing question. I took about 17 months off because I was discovered with lymphoma about exactly 2 years ago. And I think, facing death and undergoing treatment really led me to rethink about a lot of things in life. First, I think I was very irrational in thinking that I could overcome natural forces and not get sick. We all know, as rational engineers by training, that by statistics, one needs to care about one's health, exercise, food, sleep, pressure in order to live longer. But somehow we often become overconfident in thinking, well, I've always slept 4 hours a day and nothing happened to me. Or, even some people would say, my grandma smoked all her life and she lived to be 100. We've all heard stories like that, but that's just irrational. So I think finally getting sick forced me to reckon with the fact that I was irrational. When I was young, I was showing off how hardworking I was. I was too lazy to exercise, not eating healthy. So I've made a resolution to change that, to become healthier. Second is that I've sacrificed a lot of things for my professional career, particularly my family and my friends. And I always felt like, when I was young, I should go maximize my impact and develop the best career. And one day when I get old, I can spend time with my family. But it doesn't work that way because when we get old, our parents won't be here anymore. So that was one of the sad things that I recognized, that I already missed the chance to spend quality time with my father. I didn't want to do that with my mother, and I certainly don't want to do that with my wife. And I also recognized that when I was getting so busy with work, my children have grown up and gone to college. So I wanted to make a commitment to myself that no matter how healthy I get and no matter how exciting my work is, I will always treat my family with the highest priority. So, for example, my daughters come home in 3 weeks. So I told people at work, and they're coming home for Christmas and New Year. And fortunately, they're getting 1 month off, where my wife and I are very excited about that. So I just told my company I'm not coming to work that month. So I'm going to spend that month with my 2 daughters because it's a rare opportunity. One day they will graduate and I won't have that chance anymore. So those are the kinds of tough decisions you have to make. I think in the past I've always assumed professional work comes first, and then when I have time, give to my family, and sometimes just act like I'm with them, but really I'm thinking about work or on my phone and just sitting next to them while they're watching Korean soap opera and I'm doing my own thing, then I said that that's not responsible and that's not fun. It doesn't leave a lasting memory. So I've really reshuffled my priorities to make sure that I spend quality time with my family. It's not that I want my work to suffer. It's just that I'm going to, when the time is important and time comes, I'm going to spend with my family, and work is second. But of course, I'm still going to spend more time at work than anything else. It's just a flip of the mentality, and I think that was important. And I think another thing that is very Chinese, and I now believe is very wrong, is the importance of one's reputation and fame. I used to really feel that was very important because when we all grew up, we were told, 人死留名, right? We were told loving money is greedy, that's terrible. But loving fame is good because people remember you for all the great things you do, and that's important. So I formulated my life's motto, as you'll see in my first few books, that I thought my life really revolved around maximizing your impact. And I think there's it's logical from an engineering standpoint, right? We all have a limited life. We want to make the most impact possible, make the world better, then we move on. It's fairly rational when you view it as from that angle. But I think that fails to recognize the fact that no matter how much we know from science and everything else, what we don't know has got to be 99% plus. So there's so much things that we don't understand. So how can we be so arrogant as to think we can measure the kind of impact for the world? Do we really feel that arrogant that we can make such measurements? How are some things like, 缘分 going to be measured in terms of rational engineering percentage of contribution and things like that? You have the fortune to have as your family members and friends those people who love you and that you love. And it's impossible to measure what that is. And I think when I was in my most furious moments of maximizing impact, I would actually make all my decisions based on that, and I thought it was right. Should I go to University A or University B? Well, whichever is more famous, whichever has more students. Should I spend more time on social network or meeting with or doing something else? Well, of course, social network, because I had a lot of followers. What should I do on social network? Well, maximize the number of forwards of my Weibo. Maximize the number of followers I have. See how many more I get every day. And that becomes almost a metric. Then I've even convinced myself that was the right thing. But when I actually went to Foguangshan and met with Xingyun Dashi, he was actually very direct to tell me that you're just too arrogant to think that you can measure everything by impact, and that a tiny person's impact makes that much difference to the world. He told me that a very important statement, and it woke me up, is that we are all so easily, it's very easy for all of us to fall into the temptation of wanting. And that wanting can be about money, but it also can be about fame. So if you create for yourselves as your life's goal to maximize your impact, then you will justify everything you do as, well, I want to get on the newspaper, give a big lecture, have lots of students, have lots of followers because I'll be more famous. Then when I'm more famous, I can do more good. But actually, you're just fulfilling your selfish need to become more famous. So I now believe that it's wrong to maximize everything, to maximize your impact. I think it's good to think about how much good you can do to the world, but some of it is determined based on how important something is. Some of it is determined by the kind of feeling you have. You just feel like this is a young man you want to help, then do it. And some of it is dependent on the缘分 and relationship that you have with people around you. So I think the engineering mentality around maximizing impact is wrong. So in terms of, to finally answer your question, I think when I move forward now, my life is about really, really living every day as though it were my last day, and making decisions not just based on my brain, but also using my heart, and not trying to believe I can sort everything based on priorities. And I believe if I'm a decent person, try to do good things, and do things that my heart tells me to do, that's good enough. And that if everyone did that, the world would be a better place. And it would be much too arrogant to try to measure everything and try to so-called maximize the impact. Thanks.
Cool. Wonderful. Thank you very much, Dr. Lee. If we all look after ourselves, we will be able to come back and listen to Dr. Lee's lecture many, many, many more times in the future. So may I now invite our president to present a small souvenir to Dr. Lee to thank him for his wonderful lecture and his sharing with us.